Hello and welcome. It's time for Eye on Africa, our top stories from the continent tonight. Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe holds direct talks with the army who ousted him. South African envoys and the church at the negotiating table. Now this as the main opposition calls for Mugabe to resign after 37 years in power. Suicide bombers in Nigeria killed at least 14 civilians and wounded 29 others in Maiduguri. Meanwhile, parents of the kidnapped Chibok girls still in captivity say the government is not doing enough to bring them back. And the French Prime Minister is in Morocco for a two-day visit to reinvigorate trade and cooperation with the kingdom, bridging the country's business and engineering schools, high on the agenda. But first, President Robert Mugabe met the army commander who put him under house arrest in negotiations mediated by South African envoys and the Catholic Church, according to state media. Now this after the army takeover Tuesday night. Well, it all started last week. Mugabe sacked his deputy, Emmerson Mnangagwa, leading to speculation that First Lady Grace Mugabe would take his place, dividing the ruling ZANU-PF party. The main opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, is calling on the president to resign along with dozens of civil society groups. Now, after 37 years in power, Mugabe once vowed to rule until death, but has so far resisted pressure to step down. To Harare, where a little earlier our correspondent Frank Chikaware gave us this update.
The South African envoy that is here in the country has held a meeting with President Mugabe and the army chief Constantino Chiwenga, and the details of that meeting are still very sketchy. At the moment, we have not heard what they agreed on or whether there has been a deal or not. At the same time, the SADC organ Troika on Defense and Politics has been meeting in the capital of Botswana, Gaborone, this afternoon. We are still waiting to hear what the Troika agreed on. At the end of the day, the situation on the ground remains tense. The army is still in control. They are still holding President Mugabe under house arrest at his private palace, some few kilometers outside the capital, about 15 minutes drive from the city center. What we are hearing is that the former freedom fighters are going to be organizing a rally this coming Saturday to be held just outside the capital to support what the army chief and his troops are doing against President Mugabe.
Well, on to another former freedom fighter, a key player in all of this. I'm talking about Emmerson Mnangagwa. Where is he right now?
Mnangagwa is reported to be in South Africa. Since he left the country following his sacking, he has not gone public, save to say that he issued a statement to say that he is going to be returning to Zimbabwe in a few weeks to lead the country. He has not made any official or any comment regarding this issue, but we understand he is in South Africa. We have been talking to war veterans who are very close to him, and also his allies who are still within President Mugabe's government. They are saying Mnangagwa is in South Africa and he is prepared to come back anytime soon. So the meeting that is set to be held this coming Saturday is actually scheduled to install Mnangagwa as the interim president. But however, we are also getting information from the press conference that was held by former Vice President Joyce Mujuru, who was also sacked in the Mnangagwa fashion, that there has to be a transitional government. At the same time, the former Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai, who formed a unity government with Mr. Mugabe in 2009, is saying that Mr. Mugabe must save himself from the embarrassment by stepping aside to pave way for a transitional authority that would include all opposition and all opposition leaders and all the leftists in the ruling party.
Well, that was Frank Chikaware reporting there for France 24 from Harare. Next, let's move on now to Nigeria's Borno state, where at least 14 civilians were killed and 29 others wounded after 4 suicide bombers carried out separate attacks in Maiduguri on Wednesday. 2 men and 2 women infiltrated the community, detonating the bombs strapped to their bodies. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attacks. However, the area is often caught in the crosshairs of the Boko Haram group. Our correspondent in Lagos, Anna Cunningham, spoke to us about what the government is doing to stop Boko Haram attacks.
Boko Haram has been a thorn, really, in the side of the Nigerian government for about 9 years now. That's how long this insurgency in the northeast of Nigeria has been going on. We know that the previous government of President Goodluck Jonathan failed to defeat Boko Haram, and President Muhammadu Buhari was elected back in 2015 on a ticket to defeat Boko Haram. But as you were describing there, another attack hitting Maiduguri, killing a number of people, and these attacks are continuing. It's not necessarily on the large scale that we were talking about back in 2014, 2015, but nevertheless, what we're hearing is that in the first 8 months of this year alone, there were more suicide attacks than in the whole of last year. So really, the Nigerian military might be saying that it's managed to push back Boko Haram and liberate various towns and villages. But clearly, the issue is still ongoing and the fight against Boko Haram continues.
Let's talk about one of the most talked about incidents involving Boko Haram. Today, the parents of the Chibok girls who are still in captivity are protesting. They're saying the government really are not doing enough to bring the girls back, are they?
Well, look, the parents, you can understand absolutely how frustrated they must feel that after all this time, I mean, it was in April 2014 that those Chibok schoolgirls were kidnapped. And although we have seen a number of them released in a prisoner exchange deal, we know that there are still 113 of them unaccounted for, still missing. We know that the government of President Buhari has said that talks are ongoing through some kind of back channels with Boko Haram, but clearly that's frustrating for the parents of those children who are still missing. There's also talk saying that some of the Chibok girls simply don't want to return. They want to stay as Boko Haram wives, but we've no way of knowing whether that is propaganda talk. So those protests do continue.
Anna Cunningham reporting from Lagos for France 24 there. Next, French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe travelled to Morocco for a 2-day visit. He met with his counterpart Saadin El Othmani at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rabat. They oversaw the signing of several agreements between the two countries in the fields of economy, culture and education, an area that already enjoys close cooperation. French business and engineering colleges have set up branches in Morocco. Our reporters went to visit one.
There are roughly half a dozen French colleges in Morocco, like this engineering school in a residential area of Casablanca. Philippe is one of 16,000 sub-Saharan students in the country. He travelled from Abidjan to pursue his studies 3 years ago. He says there are many advantages to studying here.
There's a financial advantage in studying in Casablanca. The living expenses are reduced, and I've got no visa problems here. And for those of us who come from sub-Saharan Africa, it's a good thing because it gives us international experience. And when we go to La Rochelle to study the main subjects, we can easily fit in and follow the classes.
Each student goes on to study for 6 months at the main campus in the French city of La Rochelle. Starting this year, qualifications awarded in Casablanca will be officially French, an important benefit for some Moroccan students.
For me, it was easier to follow a French program and go to a French school while staying in Morocco. It's the same thing after all. It's as if I was in France.
Let's go back to the presentation.
This also means that French qualifications will accompany the future elites of the African continent. 30% of the school students already come from sub-Saharan Africa. The facility plans to double this number in the coming years.
Currently, there are 8 million students on the continent, and this figure is due to increase to 30 million in 2030. It's this growth on the continent that calls for development, especially at the engineering level.
Training Africa's future experts, a rapidly growing enterprise, and good business potential for France's prestige colleges.
Well, just like France, but with a bit more sun, I think. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. You're up to date with news from across the continent. Stay tuned. There's more news coming up here on France 24.